Welcome to Plastic Model Mojo, a podcast dedicated to scale modeling, as well as the news and events around the hobby, where we hope to be informative and entertaining and help you keep your modeling mojo alive. Good evening, Dave. It's time for episode 49 of Plastic Model Mojo, man. That 50 just keep getting a little bit closer. We're almost there.
49. Can you believe it, man?
No, I can't.
It seems like we started doing this the other day.
I know. It's like Goldfinch and Company just had 100 not all that long ago. I guess it has been at this point. But wow, I can't believe it. 50 episodes. Well, we'll have to do something for 50. We'll figure that out. But what's been going on in Dave's model sphere since episode 48?
Well, Dave's model sphere for the past about 30 to 60 days has been a little bit cramped because, as you and I were talking, work, when you're busy at work or you got a lot of pressure at work or you're putting in a lot of time at work, it exhausts you. You come home and you want a model to relax, but you just, you don't have any energy. So the last 60 days or so, I've had a lot on my plate job-wise, but managed to wrap up in the last 2 weeks or so. Major contested hearing, a major mediation, got my taxes done. I've got a trial on Thursday that's going to be fairly simple. But other than that, that's taken a lot of that weight off my back. And I'll tell you what, I really feel it in the model room because the last week or so, I have been really getting stuff done in the model room.
Well, that mosquito's coming along. We can talk about that a little later. But
absolutely.
Glad to hear it, man.
So how's your model sphere?
I tell you, I was... just tonight, actually, the July-August issue of the IPMS Journal showed up today.
Yep, mine showed up 2 days ago.
And you must be privileged being a e-board member.
Yeah, that's right. I get it. Special courier pigeon.
Get the hot copy.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I don't know if you've read any of this stuff yet.
I actually haven't because of all the other stuff going on at work.
Well, the editorial, this issue is, I'm just going to read a blurb of it. The title is Negative Modeling a Positive Influence? And it's from Dana Mathis. And he says, I'll just quote from Dana Mathis, I recently encountered the term negative modeling on a scale modeling podcast. It was used to describe the time and effort modelers invest in fixing mistakes, as it is one step forward, two steps back. I don't know if we coined that phrase, but I know if you heard it on a podcast, it came out of your mouth.
Yes, it did. Great. Yep. Listen, I'll have to read it now. But yeah, there are days. Luckily, I haven't had much in the way of negative modeling lately. That's, while my positive hasn't been as much as I'd want it to be, my negative really hasn't occurred too much. So I'm kind of feeling good about that.
So the model sphere has been catching up on some periodicals. That's about it. And
okay.
Talking to the machinist about lathe and millwork.
Yeah, I saw on Facebook you were playing with your lathe a little bit. So
yeah, we can talk about that later. But
yeah,
that's what's been going on.
Good. Well, when you're done with work and you get down into the model room, there's nothing better than grabbing yourself a little modeling fluid. So, Mike, what's your modeling fluid of choice?
Well, I kind of splurged on that Bib and Tucker last time, so I'm back to my staple, my Bullet orange label. So it's a stalwart, low-cost bourbon. I really like it, and folks know it.
Never disappoints.
What about you?
Well, I'm doing something different. This may be, I think, I've done cocktails or mixed drinks. I've done beer. I've done bourbon. I think I even might have done gin, or scotch. I know I did single malt scotch, but this may be the first time I've done a wine. I went to a neighbor's retirement party the other day, and one of our other neighbors brought over a bottle of red wine from a winery called 19 Crimes. and this is their Cali Red. It's kind of distinctive because it has a illustration of Snoop Dogg on the label of the wine, and I enjoyed it so much. I had given her some peppers that I'd grown in my garden, and so she brought over a bottle of this stuff and gave it to me as a thank you. And this stuff's good. We'll have to talk about it at the end, but this will definitely get me through this episode.
Well, all right. We'll have to hear Snoop Dogg, eh?
Snoop. That's right.
All right. That's interesting. Well, tonight we're going to do a little bit something different because we have a lot of listener input in our special segment, which we'll get to a little later in the episode. So we're going to kind of hold on to some listener mail until next episode 50. And I also want to reiterate that in last episode 48, our kind of call to action was, what are you doing to get better? What's your plan for getting better? And we've gotten some good feedback from that. And I'd like to see some more. So over the next 2 weeks, if you've wanted to say something on that topic, what's your plan for getting better? Or how do you tackle that? Send us an email, plasticmodelmojo@gmail.com, and we'll work that up into listener mail for episode 50. There is one listener mail, though, I want to get in. It's from our friend Michael Luzzi from the Jack Weislich Polish Coast Watchers chapter of the IPMS up in Peoria, Illinois. I don't know. I feel like we're kind of surrogate. It's our surrogate chapter. We got it. We belong to the IPMS, but we've made some good connections and some good rapport with the guys in Peoria area there, and they seem to enjoy the show. In fact, I'm going to go back to the IPMS Journal again because they have a nice article on the Polish Coast Watchers chapter, and we get a couple of plugs, man.
All right. I'm telling you, living large.
Living large. I'll quote these again. This is from President Bob Eisler of the Polish Coast Watchers. And the article, I guess, actually, Michael Luzzi wrote the article, if I'm not mistaken. Yes, he did. Quick check there. And he says most recently, Bob Eisler, the president, has been hosting in-person meetings while COVID-cautious members Zoom in. Bob is a gracious host who provides a variety of snacks, thirst-quenching modeling fluid made famous by Mike Baskett and David Knights on the Plastic Model Mojo podcast. They were influencers, man.
Nice. Absolutely. I love that. And the guy, listen, the Polish Coast Watchers are a very, very active chapter, and they're really making a name for themselves, and I'm kind of happy to see that happen.
And he goes on to say about recruitment that new members have joined the chapter by meetings in the modeling aisle at Hobby Lobby, joining the club Facebook page, connecting with a nearby IPMS chapter, attending make and take events, or hearing about the club on Mike and Dave's Plastic Model Mojo. So,
all right,
glad to help, guys.
Yeah, do we get a kickback on that or something?
I think 100 times 0 is
I know
still 0.
That's all right. Hey, if we're growing the hobby, man, that is a big bonus.
Well, we're trying, and it's nice to hear that maybe we are doing it in our own little way here and there.
Yep,
it's good stuff, man.
Yeah, I agree. Well, speaking of recruiting and all that stuff, I want to take a moment to ask the folks who are listening to this episode, when you're done listening, please go to whatever podcast app you use to download and listen to the podcast. Take a moment to rate the podcast. We'd appreciate it if you gave it 5 stars. It helps. We'd also like you to tell a friend. All of you out there are modelers. I know that all of you have to have one modeling friend who probably isn't listening to the podcast, or any podcast for that matter. And we'd appreciate it if you would reach out to them and tell them that you enjoy this podcast and get them to listen. Now, if they're an older member, you may have to help them figure out how to download a podcast app on their phone and do all that stuff, or show them where to find us on their home computer. But we'd appreciate it if you do it. It's the best way for podcasts to grow. And we've been growing, and Mike and I are over the moon about how much we've been growing. So please do that for us.
And if you're checking us out, please check out all the other podcasts out there in podcast land. You can go to modelpodcast.com. That's modelpodcastplural.com. It's a consortium website we podcasters have set up with the help of Stuart Clark from the Scale Model Podcast to have a single repository of all the podcasts out there with links to those shows. And I think now I need to go look, but I think he started including the blogs as well.
That's great.
So we'll have to see that. And some of those blogs are The Inside Guy, Mr. Jeff Groves from our neighbor up in Indiana there. Hopefully get to see him in Cincinnati next week.
I saw him at MMCL show, so I am really looking forward to seeing him in Cincinnati, and he sent me an email telling me he's planning on being there.
And maybe you won't catch cold and sneeze and blow that little First to Fight TKS tank you built into oblivion.
I know. I cannot wait to see that in person. I've seen the one that Tom Balke-Romanowski built out of photo etch in 72nd scale, but I don't think I have seen one of these TKS tankettes in 72nd scale in plastic. So I'm really kind of looking forward to that.
Well, you better take your glasses.
Definitely. I don't go anywhere without my glasses, man.
Oh, we've also got Chris Wallace and Model Airplane Maker. He's got a blog and a YouTube channel. Some good stuff there. He's always got something good to say.
Yeah.
Sprue Pie with Frets with Stephen Lee.
Stephen's done a couple of really nice blog posts lately, including a long form blog post that I found really, really interesting. So if you're not going over to Stephen's blog, please do so. Take a look. Do some reading, particularly of his long form entries. They're very, very thought stimulating. I've reblogged a couple of them myself on my blog.
And last but not least, a Scale Canadian TV, our good buddy Mr. Jim Bates out on the West Coast, who will hopefully be joining us for our episode 50.
Yes, I've already confirmed that he will, if he hasn't committed some sort of hockey suicide first, simply because neither of the two teams he roots for are doing well in this early bit of the hockey season.
There's still time to turn it around.
That's what I keep telling him, man, trying to keep him out of despair. Finally, speaking of growing the hobby, this is the spot where I ask people to join their IPMS national organization, either IPMS USA, IPMS Canada, IPMS Australia, IPMS UK, whatever national organization covers you. Please consider joining. The national organizations really do a great job. And sometimes I don't think people appreciate all of what they do. So let me just assure you, they all do a lot for the hobby. Please consider joining, and join your local chapter too. If there's a chapter within an hour or even an hour and a half of you, you ought to consider joining and going to the meetings if you can, even if you can't always get to the meeting. Making those modeling connections is great. I'm here to tell you, as much fun as modeling is, sitting around with like-minded people talking about modeling is fantastic. So if you've got a chapter near you, please consider joining them too.
Well, Dave, let's pause here for a little bit of time and have a word from our sponsor, who is also our special guest tonight.
You got it.
Plastic Model Mojo is now brought to you by Model Paint Solutions, your source for Harder Steenbeck airbrushes, David Union power tools, and laboratory-grade mixing, measuring, and storage tools for use with all your model paints, be they acrylic, enamels, or lacquers. Check them out at www.modelpaintsolutions.com. All right, Dave, we're back, and it's Wagon's Ho for Omaha time.
Yes, sir. I'm pumped because we passed a milestone.
We did. At the time of this recording, it is 273 days away until the 2022 IPMS National Convention in Omaha, Nebraska. And we just passed the opening of the hotel booking window. We warned you.
Yeah, I don't know if they're sold out yet. As you and I record this on the 19th, which is 4 days after the booking window officially opened, I don't know if they're sold out yet. If you haven't booked your room and you want to stay in one of the two convention hotels, you need to call and make a try of it. I was on the phone at 8:30 in the morning on the 15th, making our reservation. I was texting with Mike while I was on the phone with the hotel folks, and we got our reservation, and we know a fair number of people who did. So if it's one of the things that makes the national convention seem like it's really going to happen soon is when you make that room reservation. So I'm pumped already.
Well, I can also announce that the convention website is up now, and it is IPMSUSA2022.com. All one word, IPMSUSA2022, all one string of characters.com.
Right, that's 2022.
Yes. The only pertinent information right now that's the next milestone is that general registration or online registration will start February 1st.
Great.
According to the website. So that's, we got a few months for that, but something to put on your calendar so you can get in there and get that done as soon as possible. And don't forget and have to wait in lines later.
That's right. Listen, I'm telling you, as I told you leading up to Vegas, the thing to do is to pre-register, because Mike and I got to Vegas Wednesday night after everything was closed up. We walked down at 9:00 on Thursday morning, just as registration opened. Walked up to the pre-registration table, and we were packets in hand, name tags on, and headed into the vendor room at like 9:05. It was a fantastic process. Bob and the whole gang really did a great job. I have no doubt that the guys in Omaha will do a great job. So keep an eye on that. And when it opens, go ahead and get pre-registered.
And I also wanted to say something that it seems like most of the podcasters we talk to regularly are all registered, are all booked their rooms as well. I know Scott and the Posse gang have done theirs, and
OTB has done theirs.
And OTB, according to their latest episode, and they're a big scream of Wagons Ho.
Yeah, that's right. Wonder where they got that.
I don't know. Glad to hear it, though.
You and me both.
So I hope that works out, because it's just going to be a big time.
I'm looking forward to our now traditional, since we've done it once, it's now become a tradition. I am looking forward to our Thursday morning breakfast with all of the podcasters.
All right. Well, we're going to need a bigger table, I got a feeling.
I got a feeling you're right.
And all our Canadian friends are all booked as well, sounds like.
Yep, absolutely. They may have to sneak under some barbed wire to get across the border, but sounds like they're coming heck or high water.
Oh, God. Hopefully by the summer of next year, they'll get some relief.
I would think so.
All right. Well, we thought that last year, too.
Yeah, I know. I know.
Well, until the information gets a little more forthcoming and regular, that's going to be all we got tonight for Wagons Ho for Omaha. So get your room booked if you hadn't.
Absolutely. It's a great hotel. It's a great convention center. You'll love it. So, Mike, it sounds like you've actually been building a little.
Yeah, a little bit. I've got a few more parts together, a head and a limb or two for the Musaru Cup Gundam Challenge we're working on.
Well, good. How are you enjoying building a Gundam?
I don't know yet. It's kind of a look and do kind of proposition, because it just goes together so well, and all the seam line, not all of them, but most of the seam lines and joints are hidden. They're like covered up by a different panel that has a natural break line or something. So.
Right. So it's like building armor then.
Hey. More like Legos, I think.
There you go. Hey, I had to take that shot.
I think what's interesting about it is, you're sitting there looking at these sprue gates and joint lines, gaps and stuff, and you're just like, wow, do I need to do something about that or not? So you got to look what's happening in the next 2 or 3 steps to see if you even need to bother with it.
Right.
And like so far, 90% of the time you don't.
Well, I think that's one of the attractions of these Gundams for people, is that, for folks who enjoy building but don't particularly enjoy filling and sanding, I think the Gundams provide those folks with a real enjoyable outlet that makes that gives them the joy of construction and the accomplishment of actually getting something together without what I know some people find as tedium. It's not, I don't always find it that way. Sometimes I find it relaxing, but filling and sanding can be kind of frustrating, and some modelers don't really like it. So I think that's one of the attractions of the Gundams.
It'll go straight to paint pretty quick, I think.
Yeah.
Which will be fun. I'll be breaking out that Infinity and trying some of the new paints I bought.
You know what? When you think about it, this may be a great opportunity for you to break that Infinity in and really exercise it and play around with it without having any particular, any particular scheme imposed on you.
I think so. So we'll see what happens. Well, in addition to that guy, folks are getting tired of hearing about it, I'm sure. I'm just about to get those stinking ammo boxes done. At least the wooden parts. The shells are another story, but I'm working on those too. But, I'd hope to get that done last weekend. But, when you leave for a friend's wedding at like 4:30 in the afternoon and you don't roll back into the house until like after 1 a.m.
Yeah, that kind of takes the wind out of your modeling sails.
Not only do you not get anything done Saturday evening, but it's not very high on the list Sunday either.
Yeah, in the words of the great Roger Murtaugh, I'm getting too old for this stuff.
Yeah, I know. And I've posted on Facebook. I've been messing around with my machine tools. I think I'm about ready to turn a gun barrel that's got some real dimensions to it. I don't know what yet, but doesn't really matter. I just got to try something.
Well, I really will be interested to see if you've got enough travel in that lathe that you could do brass or aluminum turned barrel for that model collect turret. Because I think that if you could do that, it'd be really impressive.
I don't know, man. It's long.
I know.
I could always buy a longer bed for the lathe. You can buy them separately.
Oh, can you really?
Yeah, I could make it a 14-inch bed instead of a 10.
Oh, I didn't know that. Well, there you go. There's your inspiration.
We'll see. That'd be a lot of metal. I don't think brass would probably be too heavy.
Yeah, it may well be. Well, of course, you definitely would have to drill it out, at least to some depth.
And the other thing, I haven't said anything about it here or even on the Facebook. Also, I have a milling machine, and I've got it's a project just to play around with the mill. It's an old T-34. I'm trying to machine the upper fighting compartment roof off of.
Okay, so for those folks out there who aren't mechanically and tool inclined, I know what a lathe is. What exactly is a milling machine, and what does it do?
A milling machine has a cutting tool on the Z-axis on a vertically oriented spindle, and it's got a 2-axis travel underneath it, and it's basically for making square cuts and flat cuts and stuff like that. I mean, there's other things you can do with it, but lathes for turning round parts, a mill's for doing everything else, pretty much.
Gotcha.
In a nutshell. More on that later. I don't have much of an update there, but I am playing around with the milling machine too, but I'm having some trouble clamping the part.
Well, let me ask you this. Considering what you're doing in your new job, has your sudden affinity for playing with your own home tools, such as lathe and milling machine, do you think that any of that comes from what you're getting to play with at work?
Probably a little bit, and then I've got a pretty good rapport now with our machinist, who's a super guy and eager to help me. He likes teaching his craft.
Well, good.
So that's helping a lot. So, and he's like a ninja Jedi Spetsnaz machinist. I mean,
he's not, after he teaches you all the secrets, he's not going to have to kill you or anything, right?
No, but he's no what's the word? Apprentice. He's no apprentice. Certainly the journeyman.
Yeah.
Well, what have you been working on? That's what I've been working on.
Well, what I've been working on is the Mosquito is in paint and in the middle of decals, and it's going along well. But I'll tell you what, the last several models I completed had little or no in the way of decals. And this, of course, the Mosquito, it's got a normal number of decals for an aircraft, including data, stenciling, and all that. And I'll be honest with you. I think decaling, like a lot of things in modeling, is particularly like airbrushing, is a perishable skill. That if you don't do it regularly, you kind of, I don't want to say forget how, but you lose some of the skill in doing it, and
I lose your finesse.
Yes, exactly. And I've putting the decals on this Mosquito. I've run into a couple of challenges as far as making sure I'm a person who glosses before decals, and a couple of areas I didn't pay attention to that detail and didn't get it as glossy as I needed it to be. Also playing around with setting solutions and decal softeners. There's a huge range of them, and I've been kind of using this as an opportunity to experiment with them. And I need to build more stuff with decals because you can lose your touch. But the Mosquito's coming along. Meanwhile, the TU-128 is moving along as well. For some reason, I'm fairly inspired by it at the moment, at least partly because that gives me an excuse not to go chip the M30, which I have to do and will do now that my work stuff is mostly behind me. And but I've been making some progress on it. I like it. I like the way where it's going. For as big a model as it is, it's amazing how few parts it has comparatively. You would think there would be a lot more parts to it, but there aren't. It probably has no more parts than the Mosquito has, and the Mosquito's half the size or less than half the size of this thing. So, but I am looking forward to it, and I'm looking forward, but trepidatiously looking forward to putting bare metal on the thing, to hitting it with the Alclad and trying to really get good at a metal finish. And that's the whole reason I did this, was to get better at scribing and to get better at bare metal finishes. That's part of my plan for getting better. And I'm enjoying the challenge. Now, I may find myself in the middle of it and end up regretting it, but you know what? No, hey, you don't take a chance, you don't make progress, man.
That's true. That's true. Yep. Got to put yourself out there every now and then.
You really do. And in fun. Now, don't feel like you have to do it like it's some sort of work assignment. Because as I said, work has been for the last 60 days or so a real bear. And, you don't want to come home to a hobby and feel like you got to work at it, because that's just pressure you don't need. But if you get joy out of trying new stuff, learning new skills, when you don't succeed, yeah, it can be a bummer. But when you do succeed, it's like, wow, I didn't think I could do that. Or I just learned something new. Just like you and those ammo boxes, learning to paint fresh wood rather than weathered wood. You've now learned a new skill that you didn't have before. And it wasn't something that was immediately intuitive. You had to think about it and play with it. And you actually tried several different things. And now that's a tool you can stick in that toolbox if you need it again.
That's right, man. So is that all you got going?
That's pretty much it. Although I'll tell you, there are some things on the shelf of doom that are calling my name. So as soon as this Mosquito's done, which maybe within the next 30 days, if I'm lucky, then I'm thinking I'm going to pull something off the shelf of doom.
Like an M30 howitzer.
Well, there's that, but the M30's not on the shelf of doom. It's still sitting on my bench.
Oh,
it's
okay.
It's just mocking me. It's just mocking me.
I learned to ignore those mocking models.
I hear you. So if you've been building a little, have you been spending a little?
I've been quite reserved lately. And the only thing I've bought since the last time we ran this segment are 3 sets of color modulation paint from the Mr. Color line.
Yeah, I saw those. And I didn't know those existed. How many are there? Only armor sets? Or there aircraft sets? Or?
I don't know. I've not looked for any, but I've not stumbled across any aircraft ones in my search for the ones I was after. So I think there's only 4 sets, and I think they're all armor sets.
Gotcha.
And now I own 3 of them.
And you'll own the 4th, I'm sure.
I'll own the 4th as soon as I can find it domestically. It's kind of elusive right now, but they are, well, let me back up. TJ Holler from the Plastic Posse podcast posted some photographs of an M4 Sherman he's building for their M3 M4 group build that they're going to I'm in the thing too. I just haven't started my project yet, but the goal is to build these Shermans and M3s, Stewarts and not Stewarts, but Lees and Grants, and all the subtypes from that, the self-propelled guns and recovery vehicles and all that, and enter them in Omaha as a group build.
Yeah, kind of like they did this year in Vegas, right?
Right. And TJ had used the olive drab set. I'm like, it's like, hey, where'd you get these? Because I've been thinking about it for some time to get these, but you're the first person I've seen use them, and it looks like it worked out pretty well. We had a little short conversation about it, but anyway, so he's kind of responsible for my broken wallet, though it's not broken too bad. I picked up the olive drab set. I picked up the Dunkelgelb set for German mid-late war, and I picked up the Panzer Gray set. I'm still looking for the Russian green set. Now, what's neat about these sets is they're 4 graduations of a base color, right? There's like a base, a shadow, and 2 highlight colors.
Yeah.
And most of the Mr. Color line are in 10 mil bottles. The bottles in these sets are in 18 mil bottles. So you get quite a bit of paint, actually.
Good.
So I'm pleased with the packaging and what was in the color shades look good. I like the way the graduations are broken down to the degree they are. I don't know. I'm probably going to fire one of them up on the Gundam. It's probably what I'm going to do.
Ah, okay.
But I'm not going to do some World War II scheme on a mobile suit. I'll just use those colors as the base for whatever scheme it is.
Oh, come on. We'd all love to see a mobile suit and an ambush scheme.
No, we wouldn't.
Just think all the practice you'd get with that Infinity.
I don't need an ambush scheme to do that.
I know. I'm just abusing you.
Well, what about you? That's all I've bought. Absolutely 3 sets of paint. Of course, I was on vacation for part of the week. That probably had something to do with it.
Probably had something to do with it. Actually, I have been pretty darn good. I ordered, sadly enough, off of eBay, I ordered a set of decals solely to get some serial numbers for the Mosquito that I'm building. I tried to basically look around the sheets I had to cobble together the serial number I need, because the Mosquito I'm building is not one that's been depicted alone completely on any sheet out there. So I had to come up with a serial number, and I went on eBay, and I have paid like $10 or $12 to get a decal sheet where I am only going to use 6 serial numbers, 3 on each side. So that's a little sad, and I admit it's a little sad, but you know what?
It's just the way it works.
It's not, in the scheme of things, it's not that big a deal. I'm not bothered by it. In addition to that, I ordered a book on the AK color weathering pencils book from Dr. Strangebrush, along with I'm thinking it was MiG ammo. I'm trying to remember who made it. They made a little World War II train car, the classic 40 and 8 train car. I think MiG ammo made it in 72nd scale as a resin item. And Evan's probably partly responsible for this, because on his site, in addition to having all of his armor videos, he occasionally paints and weathers a train car.
Yep.
And train cars are they're really a great palette on which to practice weathering. And also you can stick them in dioramas almost anywhere. You can put a little piece of track and a train car on it. It works out. So it's an interesting eye-catching thing. And I was able to pick it up for a very good price. So I ordered that as well. But other than that, I think I'm still in my post convention, post nationals funk. Although I did buy a couple of things. I think I mentioned last time at the MMCL show. I sold some kits, but I also picked up a few things. So stuff worked out, and I probably ended up about even on that.
Well, we've been pretty good, so
yes. Absolutely.
Maybe not next time. We'll see. I already got my eye on a few things, but we'll.
You and me both. In fact, there's an order I have to place really soon.
Me too. That's for episode 51.
You got it.
Well, speaking of Dr. Strangebrush, we've had a chat with him earlier this week, and as a recurring guest. And to preface it a little bit, we've spent several months now soliciting listener questions, and along with him, he's done it as well, because he gets questions all the time. And we've kind of distilled these down into some basic questions that we're going to talk about in this segment. So let's get on to the Revenge of Dr. Strangebrush. Well, Dave, our special segment tonight is the next installment of Dr. Strangebrush. Joining us tonight from the West Coast is John Miller himself. John, how you been since we last saw you?
Howdy ho. Doing well. How about yourself?
Not so bad. It's been a while since we saw you in Las Vegas at the Nationals. It's a pleasure to meet you face to face. I'd never done that. So thanks for hanging out with us.
Definitely. That was an experience.
Yeah, we appreciate you dropping by the party suite. That was a fun experience. And you were actually in Las Vegas for real reasons. You were putting on presentations, weren't you?
I was. I gave 2 talks on airbrushing while I was there, and had very good attendance at both. A lot of the people that I know from the site, that are clients or customers of mine for years, showed up with their questions, and it was really nice to put a face to a name. So I want to give a shout out to all the folks that showed up to both my talks. Thank you very much. I greatly appreciate your support. And it went really well, and it was a good show all around.
Are you planning on doing seminars at Omaha?
I'm not sure I'm going to be able to make Omaha this year.
Oh, okay.
Bit of a conflict with a family function that we have scheduled for next year. So I'm not sure I'm going to be able to make it or not. But if I do make it, I will be I'll offer myself, if they want to do some talks. But I won't know that for the next couple of months.
Okay. Well, fingers crossed.
Yes, I appreciate that.
Well, as we've been harping for a couple of months now, we had the idea, and John had the idea, to solicit questions through his website and through the podcast, and we've kind of distilled some of those down, and that's how we're going to handle the discussion tonight. I'm going to go through these questions and let John expound on them a little bit. How's that sound?
Sounds good.
All right. Well, we ready to roll?
Ready when you are.
All right. Well, the first one comes from Mr. Paul Wheeler. And he's asking 1 airbrush per paint to ease crossover contamination between acrylics and lacquers. Should we be using more than one airbrush, John?
No. Next question.
Wait a minute, John. I need to remind you, you sell airbrushes.
Oh, damn, that's right. Okay, yeah. Let me say that again. No.
Okay.
No, you don't need two airbrushes for each thinner that you're using. And now that said, if you are deep pocketed and you enjoy working with airbrushes, as do I. I like working with them, not the deep pocketed part. Uh, then get two airbrushes because that makes it easiest. But if you're like most folks working on a bit of a budget, you don't have to have two airbrushes to shoot acrylics and lacquers. In one session, when I'm sitting down to work, I will often go back and forth, bounce back and forth between an acrylic and a lacquer, and I'm only using one airbrush at a time, even though I have about 50,000 of them in my collection. I usually just use about one at a time. And there's an easy trick. Now, let me just back up for a second. And for those guys who haven't experienced this, let me share with you some of the dangers that can occur when you do bounce back and forth between the two and you don't take don't use proper technique. So acrylics are very, very sensitive, or some acrylics are very, very sensitive to lacquer thinners. In fact, it'll either screw the paint up or it'll make the paint cook off prematurely. Mission is a good example of this. The polyurethane in Mission, if it's exposed to a little bit of lacquer, will start cooking off prematurely and turn into a goo. So if you are, let's say you're shooting Alclad and you finish and you clean the brush and, you blow the brush out. Here's what guys will do. Blow the brush out and you hear that hiss of air and you think, my brush is clean. Well, yes and no. There's a little reservoir of fluid usually sitting on the back end of the master seal. Because as we all know, that master seal works as a wet seal, right? So a little bit of thinner, a little bit of paint getting on the back of that seal is not out of the ordinary. If you're using a brush that's a little older and has a seal that's a little worn, you can expect even more thinner or paint on the back side of that master seal. Now, if you don't get that out and you put your new paint in, that is going to leach around the master seal. And if it's a paint that's sensitive to lacquers, it's going to turn sour on you. So one of the easy tricks for using one brush and bouncing back and forth between, let's say, a lacquer and an acrylic is, let's say you've used a brush for a lacquer. Before you go into your acrylic, take some of that thinner, put it in your paint cup, blow it out. Like I'm sure guys are going, yeah, I do that. I blow it out with some thinner. Okay, that's good. Blow it out. But then put some more of that acrylic thinner back into your paint cup and put the brush in its holder and let it sit for 5 minutes and give it time for any of that thinner that's sitting on the back end of that master seal to come around and get diluted with the acrylic thinner. And then when you blow that out, you can pretty much rest assured that if there was any residual lacquer thinner hanging on the back of the master seal or in the innards of the brush, that 5-minute incubation or that 5-minute soak with an acrylic thinner is enough to wash it out so it won't make your paint go south. And, reverse that if you're going acrylic to lacquer and you don't want the lacquer in any way contaminated. Well, put your lacquer thinner in there, let it soak for 5 minutes. Blow that out. Now you're ready to go into a lacquer.
Yeah, that's a great tip and nothing I've ever thought of. Now, do you, between acrylics and lacquers, do you ever pull and wipe the needle?
Sure I do. Both paints tend, if they're mishandled, if you put in a little bit too much thinner or too much water, if you're using an acrylic, you can shock the paint and sometimes the paint will stick to the needle. You can see a film building up on the needle, or a film building up inside the paint cup. And when I see that, most assuredly, I stop. I'll oftentimes empty the paint cup, pull the needle, wipe the needle down with a Q-tip, maybe wipe out the paint cup, maybe take a break from spraying for a minute if you see that kind of build up, and go through a little 5-minute period of cleaning where you pull the needle and put some thinner back in your paint cup, let it sit for 5 minutes and soak before you get to your next color.
All right. Well, if we're done with that one, we can go on.
I think so. So to summarize, you don't need two brushes for two different paints. But if you want two brushes for two other paints, I'm the guy to see.
You got it.
Well, this one's kind of related. It comes from Jacob Gavin, and tricks for transitioning from lacquers to acrylics. Now, I'm thinking this is not necessarily in the same paint session, but moving from one formulation as your staple to another.
Right. Yep. This is one I get a lot. I get the email from folks on the backside of the power curve, guys who have gone from acrylics to lacquers and fallen flat on their airbrushing face, if you will. And then, send me an email going, gosh, everything that could go wrong has gone wrong. Help. So, making that jump from lacquers to acrylics can be hard, especially for guys who've never shot acrylics. And there's a couple of key points you want to keep in mind. If you've been shooting lacquer-based primers, those lacquer-based paints and primers will cut through finger oil and mold release really quickly. So any residual mold release you left on the kit that you didn't clean off before you started, more importantly, any finger oil that you have imparted to the kit while building it, those lacquer-based primers will cut right through that. Not so much with an acrylic. In fact, acrylic primers, no matter what it is, don't really like finger grease, and they don't do well with mold release at all. So if you're making the transition from lacquers to acrylics, and you don't want to get that, I can't get the acrylic primer to stick for nothing, start with removing all the mold release from your kit with a 1-to-1 mix of denatured alcohol and Windex. And just as an aside, the denatured alcohol available at Sherwin-Williams stores on the West Coast, Lowe's and Home Depot in most other parts of the country. The denatured alcohol I'm referring to should be for cleaning glass. If it says it's for a fuel or for a camp stove fuel, that ain't the one. So get your for cleaning glass denatured alcohol, get your old style Windex with ammonia, not vinegar. Mix them 1-to-1. You can make up a gallon and you can reuse it over and over and over again. Soak your sprues in that for a few hours, then wash them with hot water before you start building. That will remove the mold release. And then prior to priming, you should think about degreasing a second time to remove the finger oil from the kit. And this time you can use the same 1-to-1 denatured alcohol and Windex. Get yourself a nice cotton piece of cotton T-shirt, or what I prefer, and I have them on the site, is Chem wipes, which are a tissue that is made for cleaning microscope objectives, and it has no lint or anything in it. So I'll take one of those and I'll wipe the model down, wet wipe it down with my 1-to-1 mix, and then set that aside to dry before I prime it. One more thing you may want to think about doing is, if the surface of the model lends itself to this, I should say. That is to say, if you're not doing a tank with a very corrugated surface, let's say you're doing an F8 Crusader, which is a pretty smooth airframe, you may want to think about micromeshing that airframe with something like 6 or 8 thousandths micromesh. And micromesh, as you guys mostly know, comes on either pads or on sheets. And I use it with cold water, about a coffee mug's worth of cold water with 3 or 4 drops of dishwashing detergent. So it's nice and soapy. But if you can micromesh the entire surface of the model down, yes, it's another step that takes time, but that micromeshing the surface will roughen that plastic up just enough to give the acrylic something to bite into, to give it a surface sufficiently rough that once it cures, it will cure in place and it will adhere. So those are a few things to think about when it comes to getting ready for priming. Now, when it comes ready to actually paint, if you're switching from lacquers or enamels to acrylics, you're going to experience way more tip dry, because acrylics dry faster than do enamels and some lacquers, although lacquers dry pretty fast too. One of the things you're going to want to think about doing is adding some Liquitex Flow Aid and some Liquitex Slow Dry or paint retarder to your base acrylic thinner. So what I mean to say is, if you're moving into, let's say, Vallejo, I would take my Vallejo thinner, and to that thinner, I would add 5% Liquitex Flow Aid and 5% 5% Liquitex Slow Dry. Now, Liquitex Flow Aid and Liquitex Slow Dry can be found at any Joann's or Michael's or any craft store across the United States. I've been using them for 15 years. They work with all acrylics. That's one of the reasons I like them. It's been a long time coming, but I just today just received my shipment of Liquitex Slow Dry. And along with Flow Aid, both of those reagents will be available on Model Paint Solutions starting next week. So if you have a hard time finding them, or if there isn't a Joann's or Michael's close to you, I'll have them on the site. So once you have those two reagents, Flow Aid and Slow Dry, go back to your base thinner. Let's pretend it's Vallejo. Add both of those to 5% to your thinner. So then when you use that thinner to dilute your paint, you already have the flow and you already have the retarder in there to help you with that drying of the acrylic, which is going to be a problem if you're not used to it. So again, to summarize, do a better job degreasing, or you have to do a better job degreasing both before the build and before the priming if you're going to be using acrylic primers. And if you're switching into acrylic paints, think very much about adding both flow enhancer and retarder to the paint so it behaves a bit more like an enamel than a straight acrylic. And lastly, if you're used to priming in or painting in lacquers or enamels, you know that those paints lend themselves to what would be called a wet coat. You can shoot those right onto the model with the tip close enough to the surface of the model, with the airbrush delivering a sufficient amount of paint that the paint hits wet and kind of, moves all over the surface. That's what makes enamels and lacquers so great, is how they level after they're shot. Acrylics, not so much. They don't like to level as much. So one of the things you're also going to want to think about, oh, by the way, the flow enhancer and the retarder will help with leveling. That will help all acrylics level a little better. So that's another good reason to use them. But what I was going to say is, with regards to applying them, since they don't like to go on wet as a wet coat directly, you may want to think about working on dry versus wet coats. And with a dry coat, the brush is pulled back and just enough paint is delivered so that the paint partially dries before it hits the model. And when it hits the model, it should be flat. There should be no shine coming off the recently shot paint because most of the solvent should have evaporated while it was flying through the air. That's a dry coat. So once you got your dry coat down, 45 seconds later, go back and shoot a wet coat directly over that dry coat. With the wet coat, the brush is closer to the surface. You're delivering a bit more paint, so the lever is farther back. You're going to move the brush at a faster rate so you don't develop runs or spiders. But what the dry coat does is it gives you a catch. It gives you a sticky surface for that wet coat of acrylic to hit and stick. In other words, in some ways, you have to kind of trick acrylics to get onto the surface in a nice, smooth manner. Whereas with enamels and lacquers, they tend to go on like that by themselves. So anyway, that was a long-winded answer, but those are some of the key points you may want to think about if you're switching from lacquers and enamels into acrylics.
John, one thing I wanted to mention, and I am well known for hating acrylics and loving lacquers and enamels. One of the things that I found that the difference between the two is lacquers and enamels are much more thinner tolerant. You don't have to be quite as precise, where it seems to me like acrylics are much more sensitive to getting the amount of thinner just right.
Yes, you're right. And that gets to the whole leveling situation with enamels and lacquers. You can, people who are shooting real color, AK real colors, this isn't just a cheap plug.
I love them.
I do too. And one of the things people say is, if I made a mistake and I flooded what I was shooting, and if I had done that with an acrylic, it would have spidered and made a mess. But with, real colors or any other lacquer that you're shooting in, a lacquer-based thinner, the stuff levels. The puddle kind of moves around, right? And you don't get the spiders and the runs that you do with an acrylic as easily. Did I answer your question, David?
Yes, it did, and that's exactly been my experience. All right, Mike, jump away.
Oh, real quick, since it's on the list and it's kind of related to what you just talked about. Nick Andrews is asking, what's the difference between a paint retarder and a flow enhancer?
That's a great question. So think of it this way. A flow enhancer is going to make the paint more wet. So if you're having tip dry, you're just getting those goobers building up, right there on the needle. And of course, those goobers fling themselves right into the middle of your hood or your panel or whatever. If you're getting that, that's a good case of the paint's just too dry, right? And that is best addressed by adding flow enhancer. And again, Liquitex Flow Aid. A lot of companies are making flow aids now. It's kind of like become the rage in the last couple of years. 6-7 years ago, nobody was making them, and now it seems like AK, MIG, everybody is making them. And you can use the Vallejo flow enhancer, the Vallejo retarder. In my hands, I'm just going to be blunt. They don't actually work as well as the Liquitex reagents. Not in my hands, which is why I'm sticking with all Liquitex. So that said, if you just have a situation where you're developing goobers, you may be able to address that just by adding Liquitex Flow Aid. But let's say you're sitting somewhere down in Texas or New Mexico and it's in the middle of the summer, or let's say you're sitting in Nebraska and it's the middle of the winter and you have the heater turned up to 11. Both of those situations are going to be dry and arid. And so sometimes Flow Aid by itself isn't enough to stop the paint from drying on the tip. So in that case, along with the Flow Aid, you want to add a little bit of retarder or slow dry. And the difference there is that slow dry is not going to wet the paint as much as it's going to slow the chemical reaction of how the paint dries. So it's going to make the paint dry at a much slower rate. So one of the things you'll notice is when you add Flow Aid, you don't see a big increase in the time it takes for the finish to dry. But if you end up adding retarder or slow dry, you will see a pretty demonstrable increase in the amount of time that it is required to get the finish entirely dry. So to summarize, if you don't have serious tip dry problems, you can usually get around them deal with them with just Flow Aid. If you have serious tip dry problems, you're shooting in really arid, dry conditions, or you're shooting at altitude. Let's say you're in the Mile High City in Denver, where those guys have a real challenge shooting acrylics because they evaporate so fast. So in that situation, you're definitely going to want to be thinking about both Flow Aid and slow dry in your thinner.
All right. Well, I've got them both. I know that.
Yep. Me too.
I do too. I run them both.
All right. The next question comes from Joel Makes Things, I think off Reddit and a 70-second scale channel on Reddit. How to lubricate your airbrush? Technical question.
Yeah, this is one I get a fair amount. I've actually answered this question before, and I've had guys, send me an email back and say, my gosh, that's blasphemy. How can you ever put oil on your airbrush? It will contaminate the paint and the world will end. Well, it will if you put too much. Most with the exception of Aztecs, I suspect, most airbrush levers are metal, and they actuate, against another metal surface. So that being the case, a metal on metal situation like that really does benefit from a little bit of lubricant. So, but you also want to be careful because if you overlube, the old concern is an accurate one. You can get it in the paint, and boy, talk about a slow dry that will affect your drying. Or worse, it can actually get down into the air valve and contaminate the seals down in the air valve, depending on what brush you have, and then you have an even bigger mess. So, two quick points on lubricating the brush. First, the oil. You want to use a nice, light, penetrating oil, something like a WD-40 or Ballistol. And between the two, I actually prefer Ballistol. If you can spray or put some of that into a little beaker or a little container, and take yourself a wooden toothpick and soak that in there for a couple of minutes till the toothpick is just saturated with oil. So it can hold a little drop of oil at the very tip of the toothpick. And then go back to your brush and focus on the lever and pull the lever back, let the lever go forward, and look at where the lever rides against the needle mechanism, which is usually in back of the lever. But also note if the lever rides on the sides, on each side of the main body, because many of them do, depending on the brush. So for those points where you have a metal to metal, take your toothpick that's now saturated with a little bit of oil and take a tiny drop on the tip and just touch it to that area between the two parts and let it wick in between the two parts. That's really all the oil you need, just a tiny little drop on the end of a toothpick. You'd be surprised how long that, or how that will help the smoothness of your action on the lever. The other place to think about it is if you take the tail piece of your airbrush off and you look at how the needle chuck slides in and out of, the main body tube there. A big drop of oil right there at the needle chuck where it slides into the tube, that's another good place to put some lubricant that will go a long way to making the action on your brush much, much smoother. So I've been lubricating my brushes ever since I was airbrushing in the early 70s. I started putting WD-40 on them. I've always been careful. I've never over lubricated. And as long as you don't over lubricate, you won't get it in your paint and you won't get it in the air valve.
What are folks doing or using beeswax?
So a lot of folks will use beeswax to seal their air cap or to seal the nozzle. They'll get leaks, air leaks out from around the air cap or from around the nozzle or from around the Lotus cap, whatever brush they're using. And beeswax is a way of fixing those. My preference, and I might be stepping on some toes when I say this, but it won't be the first time. My preference is to fix the problem as opposed to covering it up with beeswax. So oftentimes, if let's say you have a harder Steenbeck or an Iwata brush, if you have an air cap that won't seal and you're having to use beeswax to make it seal, you may want to take a look at the O-ring underneath that air cap and see if the O-ring has just gone bad. It needs to be replaced. If you're shooting a harder Steenbeck brush and you have to use beeswax to get the tip to seal, you may want to look at the nylon seal on the bottom of the nozzle, as well as the black O-ring under the air cap. Both of those gone bad will give you a leaky tip. So anyway, that's to answer your question. That's my understanding of how guys are using beeswax. I've never used it. I prefer to, if I can, figure out what the issue is and fix that, and keep the beeswax out of it.
All right, I didn't know if it was a lubrication technique or not, but I guess not. It's more of a sealing technique.
Yeah, that's what I've heard.
Up next, Adam Griffin has probably a oft asked question for you: how to do fine lines with Vallejo Air versus Vallejo model color.
Get this a lot. I used to shoot Vallejo for many years. It's a good paint. One of the things that you do, at least I like to do, is very similar to what I said just a few minutes ago. I'll take my Vallejo thinner and I'll add Liquitex Flow Aid to 5% to the thinner, and I'll add Liquitex Slow Dry to 5% to the thinner. And that will be my base thinner, and that's also a great thinner to do fine line with, because when you go into fine line airbrushing, the ratio of air to paint changes drastically versus if you're shooting, let's say, a wet coat. So you have way more air than you do paint, and that's why you get tip dry so readily when you're doing fine line work. So having both Liquitex Flow Aid and Slow Dry in your thinner is, a step ahead for keeping that tip dry under control. So that's the first thing I do. Now, when it comes to fine lining Vallejo, you have the challenge of, are you talking about Vallejo Air or are you talking about Vallejo Color? Because everybody knows Vallejo Air is thinner than is Vallejo Color. So for Vallejo Color, which is roughly the same viscosity as is Life Color, or as is Tamiya, or as is, a lot of other, acrylics, I will, as I do for most acrylics, I will dilute them to anywhere between 30 to 40% paint in 60 to 70% thinner. Okay. So roughly a third of paint, 33%, 33% paint, 66% thinner. That's my general dilution for just general spraying. If I'm going to be doing fine line, I'll take Vallejo down to about 20%, 20 to 25% paint, 75 to 80% thinner. Then with that thin a paint, I'll cut my pressure down to anywhere between 8 to 10 pounds. Now, a lot of guys are out there going, now you can't dial in 8 on your compressor. And no, you can't. But what you can do is dial in about 10 pounds on your compressor so you know what 10 feels like. And then using an inline air valve, which I prefer to use clipped to the end of my airbrush, I will by feel and just experience take that 10 or 12 pounds I've got coming in from my compressor and cut it down to somewhere around 8 to 10 pounds. And also at that point, now I've got my paint thinned accordingly. I've got my pressure dropped accordingly. Now the hardest part for guys to do when it comes to fine lining is closing up the distance between the tip of the brush and the surface of the model. It's the hard part, especially the aircraft guys, because we deal with compound curves. And if you're doing something that, that is a fine line that runs the length of the fuselage or the wing or whatever, you're going to have to maintain this very, very close working distance between the tip of the brush and the model as you follow along this compound curve. I think, it's hard to do on all models, but any model that has compound curves like autos and planes, it's a little bit more of a challenge. Let me give you an idea of what I mean by close. So if you're down to 20, 25% paint, 8 to 10 pounds of pressure, the airbrush tip from the surface of the model is going to be 1/4 of an inch or smaller. So you're right up on it. And guys go, oh my gosh, that's too close. And they tend to pull away, as we have, we all have a natural tendency to do. You don't want to mess the finish up by going too close and getting the paint to spider. But with practice, you'll learn to get that 1/4 of an inch or so spacing and maintain it while you're working on your line. So that's how I would approach diluting and spraying Vallejo color. Now, Vallejo air, slightly different animal. It is, of course, way thinner than Vallejo color. So with that, I almost reverse it. I run 70% paint, because it's already thin, 70% paint and 30% thinner, okay? That my pressure about the same and my working distance will be about the same. But diluting the two they're almost bookends. So 30% paint, 70% thinner with Vallejo color, 60 to 70% paint, the balance of that thinner with Vallejo air.
You are absolutely right that getting right up on the model is a tough thing to do and to get around your mind. But the amazing thing is, especially with the Harder and Steenbeck, when you do that and you've got the pressure dialed back and you've got the paint thinned and you get right up on it, I mean, it's almost like you're drawing on the model with a pen or a pencil.
Yep, exactly right. People, when I used to do fine line demos at my favorite local hobby shop, people would say, well, can you do a fine line as thin as a pencil? And I look at them and smile and say, only if the pencil is sharpened. Because if you do get that you're right, working distance is the hardest part to nail, in the whole technique. But once you get that down and you can maintain that working distance along with, the dilution and the pressure, you literally can get a sharpened, pencil line that you can control. Yes. And to your point with the Harder Steenbeck, especially the Infinity, which I know you're an Infinity driver, David.
Yeah.
The Infinity is the Porsche 911 of fine lines. So when it's doing a 1 millimeter or 1 millimeter or less wide line, it is on its court. That's what it was designed to do. And really it is a question of physics, because with the tip that you're running, which is only 0.15 millimeter in diameter, that's how big the orifice is. The next size tip up is a 0.2. So it really is also simply a question of physics. The tip and the whole brush is engineered to deliver a line that thin.
Well, I think at a higher level, what a lot of folks may run up against is some of the dilutions you're talking about might seem extreme to some people who are just moving into those kind of paints, and certainly the working distances too. But seems to be what it takes.
You're right, Mike, and that's something I get a lot. Guys usually like to start at 50% paint. It just feels right, 50-50. Then they start trying to do fine line, and they can't get rid of the stipple. First, they can't get a really fine line because the paint stipples because it's too thick. So oftentimes by trial and error, they will figure out that, hey, I have to go down to 40 or 30% paint if I want to get a fine line. And you're right. If you're right out of the gate and you're used to using 50% paint, what I'm suggesting is going to be like, Alien. But if you put some time behind your brush and you shoot some of these more dilute mixtures at a lower pressure, that's the trick, and a closer working distance, you'd be surprised how well it works.
All right. We got another technical question. This one's coming from a Michael Dassey and a Jean Dubé. I guess they both asked a similar question. You've ganged them together here. How to deal with moisture in the compressor tank?
Yep, we've all been there. It's been a year since you've emptied your tank, and you do so, and you get the nasty red water, that pours out of the tank. I think we've all been there and seen that. And I get a lot of letters from guys asking, how they can treat their tanks to lessen that corrosion. So, I want to say 20 years ago, I was fortunate to meet up with a guy in the local hobby shop that was, my fave at the time. And this guy was a master modeler, and he laid his technique on me, and I've been doing it ever since, and it works beautifully. So once every 6 months to once a year, depending on how often I've been using my compressor, I will wait for a real warm, sunny day, and I will take the compressor outside. I'll take the plug off the, open the drain plug. I'll drain the tank, and then I will sit the compressor in the sun in such a way as to, make sure the tank gets, direct sunlight, and I'll let it sit there for a couple of hours until the compressor just gets nice and toasty. With the idea being that you're driving off all the moisture and all the water that's in the compressor, so by letting it sit there in the sun for a couple of hours. Then I'll take WD-40 and I'll put that little red, stick they have that, clips into the top of the spray can there. And very carefully, I'll insert that through the open drain plug hole, and I will squirt penetrating oil onto the inner surface of the tank walls, taking care to not direct the stream at where you can see there are clearly electronics or valves connected to the tank. So direct the stream of oil into other areas where there are no electronics or, plumbing connecting to the tank. And then I let it sit out in the sun for a couple more hours and let that hot metal just kind of soak up that penetrating oil. Then I'll, without putting the drain plug in, I'll take the compressor back inside. I'll let it cool down and acclimate to room temp, put the plug back in it, and use it for 6 months or whatever until I do that, until I drain it again. What I found is when I started doing that trick of heating it up and shooting the tank with a penetrating oil, when I did drain the tank, it wasn't rusty red anymore. So, in the best case, we should all drain the tank, after every painting session. I've never been that diligent. I don't think most guys are. So I think it's more realistic that we end up draining these things every couple of months. But if you do take the step of, or take the time to, put the machine out into the sun, let it get warm, and then shoot penetrating oil, you will decrease drastically the sheer redness and the amount of corrosion, that is characteristic of that water when you do drain it.
And this is water accumulating in the reservoir tank, and it's not something your inline moisture trap on your feed line is gonna fix.
No. And that's when you start seeing a lot of moisture building up on the trap. When I lived in Nebraska, I would get moisture building up on the trap every time I fired the compressor up, and I'd have to empty the trap of moisture before I could airbrush. But that was the normal situation in Nebraska, in the winter with the heater on. I watched that moisture trap carefully because in the weather that I live in here in Seattle, I hardly ever see any moisture in the moisture trap. When I start seeing moisture in the trap, that tells me that I have enough water in my compressor tank that I need to drain it. So I use that as an indicator that I've got moisture in the tank.
Dave ruined a compressor not draining it.
Yes, absolutely true. But you know what? I did not drain it nearly as often as I should, and I have learned my lesson from that. But then again, I got 28 years out of that compressor. So
gonna call it good.
My complaints are few and far between. But yeah, if you have a compressor with a tank, that is the one thing that's the easiest to get lazy about.
Yes. So, if I wanted to be preachy, I'd say, you drain your tank after every airbrushing session or once a week. And I've never done that. I've never done that one single time in my life. Yeah. It usually goes 4, 5, 6 months, sometimes longer if I haven't done a lot of models. I think that's the majority of guys out there. So, which is why I think everybody has at one time or another been, treated to that nasty red water when they empty their tank.
Well, here's an interesting one, and maybe you can shed some light even from what angle this question is coming from. It's from Darren Ramirez, and he wants to know if UV light can be used to decrease the curing time for acrylic paints.
It can. Oh,
wow.
But before answering that question, it might be a good idea to back up a wee bit and consider drying versus curing.
Okay.
So when you shoot, let's say, let's use Mission as an example. Why? Because it's an easy one, because it's polyurethane. It's a polyurethane based acrylic. So if you shoot Mission, and I like to have I should have said this earlier, by the way, on dry coats and wet coats, especially for shooting acrylics, I like to have a hairdryer handy. I borrowed my wife's hairdryer years ago, and she's just never gotten it back. It's very handy when you're shooting acrylics. When you shoot that wet coat after your dry coat, you can take a hairdryer to that wet coat and dry it out a lot faster if you want to put yet another wet coat on it because you don't have enough coverage. So it decreases your paint time down, especially with acrylics. But the thing about, again, shooting acrylics is dry versus cure. So you've shot some Mission paint. You can use a hairdryer on it to dry it out. It'll dry, as will any acrylic, pretty quickly. But that's not the same as curing. So when a paint cures, it happens after it dries. And during that curing phase, you actually have little chemical crosslinks between the polyurethane polymers that are being formed and stabilizing the paint. And it's this curing step that will lead to a really hardy, good finish with an acrylic. And it's also, if you don't allow the paint to cure fully, is what can lead to paint coming off with tape or coming off very easily with your fingernail. It's simply that the paint hasn't cured yet. So one of the ways that you can induce these crosslinks, these chemical crosslinks between, these, let's say, polyurethane polymers, or if you're using another acrylic paint that has utilized an acrylic resin as the binder instead of the polyurethane, it's the same deal. Acrylic resins will form these crosslinks and stabilize. That's how the paint becomes stabilized. UV light causes these crosslinks to occur at a faster rate. So it's used in industry a lot to slow the curing time, increase the curing rate with all kinds of polymers, plastics, and any kind of paint or resin that uses these kinds of reagents like polyurethane. So it can be used, I should say, UV light can be used efficiently to cure acrylic paints. I went right to John Tamkin, the guy behind Mission Models Paints, who's been using this trick for years. He was actually the first guy to tell me about it. And that's how because he pushes stuff through. I've seen John airbrush. He's very good with an airbrush, and he's very fast. And one of his tricks is he gets a lot of things done and cured quickly because he puts them under a red hot heat lamp that he just gets from Home Depot or Lowe's. And fortunately, that wavelength of light is very good at inducing the polymerization, if you will, of the polyurethane in Mission, but it will do so for other acrylic paints as well.
Yeah, I had the same reaction. I'd never even thought of that.
John swears by it, and if you do a quick Google search, you'll see there's all kinds of lamps out there that are made specifically for this, for decreasing cure times or increasing the cure rates of resins and polymers and stuff. And some of them are really super expensive. John has been having really good luck with just those red heat lamps from Lowe's or Home Depot, which are not too expensive.
If you're using UV light or similar to do that, what's the cure benefit time? In other words, does it halve it? Does it quarter it? Does it, just make it 10% faster? Any idea?
That's a good question. So again, I've spoken to some guys who do this, and if I'm shooting an acrylic and I know I'm going to be putting tape on top of it, I will always wait overnight. That's my rule. If it's going to get tape, I'll wait overnight, and I've never had an issue waiting overnight. Overnight for me is 12 to 16 hours before I get back to the booth and shoot some paint, right? Guys who have been doing this trick say that if they shoot, the paint, they use a hairdryer to drive the water out of the paint to dry it, and then put it under UV light. They say they get it down to about 4 hours. So they can go shoot paint. 4 hours later, they're putting tape all over it, and they don't have to be concerned that the tape's going to rip the paint off. So if I did that, I guarantee you I'd pull some paint up. That's why I wait over.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, that's my luck too. I especially when it comes to painting, I let things over cure rather than under cure.
You can't go wrong doing that. You really can't.
Exactly.
Introducing an element of patience at that stage of the painting process is always a good deal.
Well, moving back to painting, this question, and I failed this one. I didn't get the name down, but maybe they can correct me when they hear this, and I hope they do. Do I need to completely clean the airbrush between colors, a full flush and needle pull, or just thinner flush and progress through the light to dark colors that I'm using? What's your strategy, John?
The answer is if your paint job lends itself to going lightest to darkest, right?
Yeah.
Then you can usually get by with just a thorough rinse out. And an extreme example of that is you've just shot white or gray and you have to shoot black accents. And so, you're not gonna see a lot of that white or gray come through black, especially if it's just a trace amount in your airbrush. So if you can arrange the sequence of painting such that you go from darkest to lightest, you can often make do with just a thorough cleaning. That's not always the case. Oftentimes we have to go the reverse direction, in which case I'm going to do a more thorough cleaning. The colors you really have to watch out for, in my experience, are colors like red and blue. If you have shot red or blue and you're going to shoot white or gray next, in my experience, it doesn't take much red or blue to give a tint or a hue to a paint cup full of white or gray paint. So in those instances, when I've shot a really strong color and I'm going to be going to a lighter color, I will oftentimes take the time to put the brush through a complete, 3 soak cleaning. In which case that lessens the chance to practically zero of contaminating with a darker color. So I guess in short, I would say, a little bit of common sense, a little bit of scheming ahead of time. And if you can't do light to dark, then you may have to take the time to just do a complete cleaning of your brush.
Well, the next one's along the same lines. This is actually my question. I want to hear what you had to say about this. It seems when I paint metallics that something else needs to be done to get that sucker clean again before I start painting anything else. Because often I painted a metallic, thought I had it clean, put a pigmented color in there instead of a metallic color.
Yep.
And lo and behold, right there on the top of the paint cups, some flecks floating around, staring me right in the face.
Yep. Ugly little flecks too. So I'm sure you guys remember the old Matchbox 1/32 scale, like Spitfire Mark 22.
Yep.
So I built that kit in high school, and pardon the tangent, but I had shot some metallic on something else and thought I'd clean the brush. And the next step was to shoot the clear coat on my Mark 22.
Ouch.
And so thinking the brush was clean, I threw my old Tester's gloss, because you got to remember, this is high school, guys, right? So I threw my Tester's gloss in there and I'm just spraying away. And I ended up with the only Spit Mark 22 that had a pearl finish.
Either that or it'd been to the stripper bar.
So at that point, I vowed to never, ever again shoot a clear coat after a metallic. And I'll go farther than that and say, if I've shot a metallic, I shoot metallics and treat them, very carefully, because it takes so little flake to ruin a paint job.
Yeah.
Especially if there's not supposed to be any flake in it. So if I've shot metallics, I will put the brush through a complete, and I'm going to use the brush again. I will put the brush through a complete 3 soak clean. And you remember earlier we were talking about that residual amount of thinner or paint that gets on the back side of the master seal.
Yes.
That's when you have to be thinking about that when you've just shot a metallic. Because there's going to be a trace amount of thinner and metallic on the backside of the master seal and hanging out in little nooks and crannies in the brush. You're not really going to be able to get that out without doing a 3 soak clean. Not in my experience, anyway. I don't think there's any easy way around that one. Which is why, again, for folks who are deep pocketed and like to play with airbrushes, some guys like to devote one brush to metallics. And so they never have to worry about mixing metallics with clear coats or primary colors, and never have to, worry about a pearled finish. That's my approach. I have one brush that is devoted to just shooting metallics, and I never have to worry about it.
That's exactly what I was going to say. That was my solution too. And all it takes is one time to be burned by that, and then it's like, okay, yeah, another airbrush is not such a bad thing.
Yeah, but for the guys who can't afford the second brush, they can still use the same brush, just like we were saying earlier. 2 different brushes for lacquers and acrylics. No, not at all. It may take you a bit more work to clean the brush out after you use a metallic before you use it for a paint or a clear coat, but it can be done. Usually if you just do the 3 soak method, those 3 5-minute soaks are enough time to get that thinner from the backside of the master seal and get all the flake and stuff out of the nooks and crannies of the brush. So it can be done without a new brush, or a second brush, but a second brush does make it easier.
Well, what is it about the metallic pigments? Because, for example, if I've just sprayed a metallic and I'm running just straight thinner through it, the residual pigment in the cup just looks like it's boiling in there before you even pull the trigger on the airbrush. It's just rolling around, circulating. Yes. I don't know if what's up with that.
It's because they're evil.
Is that the scientific explanation?
That's the energy of evil.
There you go.
I know what you're talking about. Oh God, I'm trying to think of the scientific word for it. I can't think of it anyway. Yeah, that movement of the flakes within the fluid. I know what you say. Metallics are funny for a couple of reasons. As you guys know, if you're shooting a metallic, you should occasionally mix it up in your paint cup. If you're shooting a big 48 scale Mustang and you're shooting it all duraluminum or whatever you're doing, you have a 5 mil paint cup of metallic. 2 minutes after you mix that metallic flake is going to fall to the bottom of the paint cup. And you're going to start getting a thicker paint with more of a texture out of it than you want. So anytime,
or you can use a gravity feed airbrush for that purpose. That's the one advantage I have, or suction feed airbrush.
Suction feed helps for sure. But the easy thing to do is just have yourself a little pipette and pipette the paint up and down inside the paint cup every couple of minutes to suspend Brownian motion. Thank you. That neuron just fired, David.
All right. There's hope for you yet.
Don't say that. Don't be cruel. Brownian motion, the movement of the just fluid movement. That's, anyway, that's an aside.
Siphon feed airbrushes.
Yeah, well, I do think siphon feed airbrushes help solve that problem of the metallic falling to the bottom. It's easier to simply shake the brush.
Yes, without a doubt.
But the thing that I've noticed, what is it about metallics? You can clean. You're spraying, it's clear. You're spraying, it's clear. You think you've got it all.
They're sticky.
Then the moment you add a pigmented paint and you're spraying, boom, you see that little flake of metal.
So something to think about there. I've seen that too, and part of it could be that the flake is just sticky. Another thing could be that if you were, just hear me out for a second, right? If you were shooting, let's just say you're shooting tester silver, right, in enamel, right?
Yeah. Sure.
And you've got some of that flake in your brush. You cleaned it out with tester's thinner, and you got it all out, quote unquote, in italicized. You got it all out, right? Okay. But now you're switching to Gunze. And without washing the brush with straight Gunze thinner first, you go right to a paint that's been diluted in Gunze. And that Gunze thinner is going to dislodge some of that flake that the testers didn't.
Gotcha.
So if you recall, one of the things way back when we were talking about the very basics of airbrushing, one of the things I said, I strongly recommend taking some of the thinner that you're going to use in whatever paint you're going to shoot. Take that thinner, put a third of a cup in your paint cup, and move the lever back and forth, blow a little bit of it through the brush, and then let the brush sit for 5 minutes with just thinner in it. With the idea being that all the little nooks and crannies and threaded areas will be filled with thinner. Any nasties that you left on the back side of the master seal will hopefully go back into solution, right? And move to the front side of the master seal. And then when you blow that thinner out before you put your paint in, you've now cleared the brush, if you will, of any residual nasties that could be lingering, like metallic flake. So if you always remember to put the thinner de jour, if you will, through your brush before the paint, if there is some of that residual metallic in there, you'll usually get it out.
That makes perfect sense.
Well, on the topic of thinners, Don Gilman has a question about homebrewed thinners and is wanting some information on the basics. Now, this is one I've never gone there. I've always used factory thinners straight up. I've never done the blend your own or whatever. And I'm not sure what drives people to do that. Tell us about it, Dr. Strangebrush. What's going on?
Well, as to motivations, a lot of guys are just tinkerers. That's the first thing. Second to that, there are savings to be had if you can come up with your own homebrew.
Okay.
it is often way cheaper to make a 2 gallons of homebrew versus, buying a pint of your favorite thinner or whatever it is. It's going to be way, way more expensive.
It's kind of like beer.
Yeah, kind of like beer. Now, I'm with you. I tried my hand at homebrews 10, 15 years ago. I got them to work. Yeah, it was fun. For me, it's easier to just buy the manufacturer's thinner. As I've said, I usually add both Liquitex Flow Aid and Liquitex Slow Dry to all of my acrylic thinners, whatever they are. That's what I add. They work well. But if you do want to try your hand at making a homebrew thinner, most guys go with alcohol. And they'll go with ethanol, they'll go with isopropyl. Some of them might go with denatured alcohol. I'll just give you a couple of hints for those guys who want to try the homebrew thinners. If you're dealing with what I would call a very strong water-based acrylic like Vallejo, like Model Master, like Life Color, those kinds of paints, you can usually make a homebrew thinner that is based on isopropyl or ethanol, somewhere around 40% alcohol. The balance of that in, clean deionized water is a good place to start. But here's the deal. Most guys don't think anything about adding wetting agents to their homebrews. And a wetting agent gets right back to what we were talking about earlier, like Liquitex Flow Aid, which is going to, make it a wetter thinner so you don't get tip dry. Or they don't think about adding a paint retarder to slow the paint down. So just like we were talking for the base thinners, the manufacturer's thinners, if you're making your own homebrew, you should think about adding some Liquitex Flow Aid and paint retarder to it to slow the paint down and to make the paint wetter. Because homebrews usually tend to be too dry, meaning there's too much alcohol and not enough water. Now, if you want to try a homebrew for some of the paints that are more of the acrylic lacquers, and here we're talking about things like Tamiya, of course, which is the AC/DC paint. It can go either an acrylic thinner or a hardcore lacquer thinner. The new kid on the block, AK Real Colors, my fave paint these days. It just goes on beautifully. That, much like Tamiya, is also an acrylic lacquer. Gunze Sangyo, as you guys know, is a very strong lacquer. For those kinds of paints, you can make a homebrew thinner, but you're going to need to use a stronger alcohol. So instead of going with ethanol or isopropyl, you should start with denatured alcohol. And the same caveats apply. Denatured alcohol for cleaning glass, not for fuel. And the same percents apply as well. 30 or 40% alcohol is a good place to start, but you should be ready to use a lot of trial and error to dial that in to something that works for you. So anyway, I don't recommend them for me. It's easier to just buy the manufacturers and add my goodies to it. But if you want to try it, those are some basic guidelines to start with.
Well, yeah, I think it could be volume driven. There's people out there. Well, most modelers build more than I do.
Me too. So, I have a very, very slow rate, so don't feel bad.
No, so I don't need copious amounts of thinner all the time because of my massive throughput through my spray booth. So
right,
that makes perfect sense. Well, we're going to get to the last question tonight, and it's
awesome.
Probably going to fall back on the fine lines, probably, or maybe there's some other tricks you can tell us. But it's from Stefano Orsi out of Quebec, Canada, and he's wanting to know how to tackle Italian smoke rings in 1/72 scale.
Okay, so here it goes. Here's the secret. Are you ready?
Don't say buy the decals like Dave did.
That's exactly what I'm going to say. Tell the gentleman there are decals available.
Yes, there. I have no doubt that John can do it, having seen his sand and spinach Italian camouflage in 72nd scale. I have no doubt that John could do it. But since there's decals available, why would you put yourself through that nightmare?
Well, because decals can be their own special place in hell.
Well,
Yeah.
we'll talk about those, but these smoke ring decals, particularly Mike Grant's smoke ring decals, are awesome.
They are.
They're awesome. They work beautifully. I just can't imagine doing that.
But this is how we separate the men from the boys in airbrushing school.
Okay, then I'm a boy. I'll be over here.
So before you can even think about tackling smoke rings, you have to be pretty adept at just shooting a fine line. So you have to have all of your dilution, pressure, and working distance issues covered. You have to be able to shoot a fine line reliably. It has to be almost second nature. You can't be focusing on the fine line aspect of it and do a smoke ring. So that's why I put shooting smoke rings, no matter what the scale, in about the same category as doing 1/72 mottling, which both of those reside in the very tip top of the airbrushing pyramid of difficulties. They're both really difficult to do. But that said, I have shot Italian smoke rings on 72nd scale. It can be done. And really what it takes is, as I said, you have to have a firm handle on shooting a fine line, and you have to be willing to put practice in. And I put a lot of practice on sheet styrene and paint mules and really got good at the technique. I'd say I put 12 or 15 hours of just shooting smoke rings before I ever actually picked the model up to do it. So that's not much of a primer, other than, it all stems out of fine line. So if you master that, the smoke rings really aren't that much more of a challenge.
Would you say you have to get to the point where you can do fine lines by second nature, so that the only thing you're thinking about when you're putting on the smoke ring is the smoke ring aspect of it? You're not worried about the fine line portion of it or anything.
Exactly. Because the challenge with a smoke ring is you got to make it meet when you come around the circle. And for me, that takes about all the neurons I've got all firing at the same time. Well, as much as they can fire anymore. So if you're thinking about, watch my spacing, watch my pressure, watch, no, you're not going to be able to do a smoke ring. So spend some time behind the brush, just learning basic fine line technique. And then once you have that, as part of fine line technique, immobilize the model on a base. I use a pan of ice and just a wad of putty. And I have the model set up so in the vise, I can move the vise any number of degrees and rotate the model so that I can get exactly on what I'm shooting. And I also have my hand immobilized in a shooter support. I'm sure if you guys have gone to a gun range, you're familiar with these leather supports that you use on the forearm, the forestock of a rifle, or you can put your wrist in it if you're shooting pistol. I've got one of those that I use to stabilize my airbrush hand. And then I've got the model in a vise that I can use to, get the exact angle I want. So when I get to actually shooting that smoke ring, I'm using very little movement in my hand. I'm only using my wrist. I'm not using my arm. And each smoke ring is an individual shot. Shoot a smoke ring, reposition the model, reposition your hand, shoot that one, repeat.
And that's something I don't think that people think about when they're doing detail airbrushing, fine lines or close in or modeling or whatever, is that thing where you immobilize your hand or wrist so that you don't get movement, unintentional movement. Now, I'm very sensitive to that because of my essential tremor, and that thing where you immobilize the spraying hand, and it gives you so much better control over the fine detail painting.
Yes. It's I love bringing guys into the shop to do fine line, and I say, show me how you do some of your fine line. And they pick the model up in one hand, which has got its own kind of trimmer. Then they pick the airbrush up in their other hand, which has a different trimmer, and between the two trimmers, they shall meet. Right. And it's so much easier. Immobilize both things. Put the model on the bench, affixed to a vise, put your wrist in a support. And one last thing that people don't think about is, at least for me, is I like a heavy airbrush because it really does help to steady my hand. Yeah, that's one of the things. That's why, may they rest in peace, I never could wrap my hand or brain around an Aztec airbrush.
Yeah.
Because for me, there was no weight there, and I never could really steady my hand. So if you have a hard time fine lining and you're using a light aluminum, main-bodied aluminum airbrush, you may want to think about adding a heavier brush to your collection, because that helps immensely.
All right, guys. Well, we've exhausted this episode's questions from our listening audience. But John, I know you've got some news from Model Paint Solutions you'd like to talk about. Catch us up.
All right, appreciate that. So as some folks have heard, the North American distributor for Harder Steenbeck retired a few months back, and Harder Steenbeck has not given up on supporting those of us who are supporting them. And we are now receiving our shipments of Harder Steenbeck airbrushes and parts directly from Germany, from the Harder Steenbeck factory. I'm now interacting with them directly. That's going very, very well. So any of the folks who are worried about not being able to get parts, it's not going to be an issue. All the parts are available, and they will remain available. Harder Steenbeck is committed to staying in North America. So that's not an issue. So that's that. Also, real quick, I have been looking for a brush to add to Model Paint Solutions that really it caters more to a beginner versus someone with more experience. As you know, it's all Harder Steenbeck brushes on the site. And I'm pleased to announce that starting this week, we will be carrying the AK Interactive AK 9000 basic line airbrush. And I tried one of these Hummers about 3 months ago. A client showed up in my shop classroom for a lesson and brought the brush with him. And I couldn't believe what a great brush it was. I was really surprised. And as you guys know, the reason that there's only Harder Steenbeck brushes on the site is because it's the only brush that I can actually get behind, because I've used one for many, many years. Likewise, with this AK brush, I can get behind it. It's a quality brush. It's heavy in the hand. It's perfect for beginners. The way the brush is configured, it's absolutely perfect for somebody new to the sport. And despite the fact that it's a nice, heavy quality brush, we're going to be able to offer it for about $70. So that's well below the $100 target that I had. Because a lot of guys, I get a lot of emails from guys saying, I want to start airbrushing. I have $100 for a compressor and $100 for my airbrush. Well, I didn't have anything Harder Steenbeck wise that started at $100. The lowest Harder Steenbeck I have is $154, which is a great brush to start with, but it's not less than $100. So anyway, we'll have those starting this week. I'm very excited about it for the beginners out there. Much like our Harder Steenbeck brushes, each AK brush will come with a Mix Kit 101, free of charge. That's 3 mil pipettes, 1 mil pipettes, stir sticks, a 3-piece beaker set, 5 and 2 mil spin tubes, and a bottle assortment, 40, 20, 10, and 6 mil bottles. So you get that whole mix kit that goes with your airbrush. That's more than enough tools to get you started mixing and diluting paints. And in addition to that, as with all of our brushes, once you get the brush, if you have any questions, you have a free tutorial with me that you can arrange at your convenience. So I can help you face to face with any issues you're having with the brush. And lastly, as I do with all the Harder Steenbeck brushes, all of the AK brushes will be bench tested by me before they go out. So if you're looking at getting into airbrushing, but you're not sure about a brush that you haven't necessarily heard of, and you don't want to end up getting a lemon, that's why I can get behind them. I will bench test every brush before it goes out. So when you get the brush, all you need to do is hook it up to air, put paint in it with a little bit of thinner before, and it is ready to rock and roll without any problems. So anyway, that's about it from the front at Model Paint Solutions, guys.
John, I got to say, I am amazed at how quickly the time passes when we get together to do these. And I always come away having learned stuff. So I hope that you'll commit to coming back real soon to do a session on decals or on some other subject, or maybe even more airbrushing.
Hey, decals, we can talk decals. We can talk clear coats, whatever you guys want to do.
We'll end up doing both at some point. I'm certain.
Absolutely.
That sounds good. All right, guys, I enjoyed it.
All right. You take care.
You too. Bye-bye.
All right, Dave. Dr. Miller never ceases to impress.
No, I'll tell you what. One of the things that always amazes me is he and I, we get up on the Zencaster chat, start recording, and it seems like 15 minutes, and I look down and an hour's gone by. And it never fails when we talk to him that I learn something new. And I think that's one of the joys of talking to him and listening to him. And if he does end up doing seminars in Omaha, you all definitely don't want to miss it, because as great as it is to listen to him on the podcast, seeing him demonstrate this stuff in person is just amazing. It really, really is amazing.
Well, Dave, how's Snoop Dogg's wine working out for you?
Well, while I don't think there's any ganja in it. I got to tell you, this is a pretty good wine. I mean, not too sweet, not too dry, very drinkable, very enjoyable. I got to say, Snoop Dogg impressed, and really impressed when you consider that a bottle of this is like $9.75. So it is by no means an expensive wine. And if wine is your thing, particularly red wine, I recommend 19 Crimes Cali Red. It's a good wine. So I know we don't even have to talk about the bullet. We know that the bullet was definitely serviceable.
Oh, it was. And you know what? I'm just going to go ahead and get the big bottle when we go to Omaha.
That's a good idea,
because everybody's going to want some.
You're right. And I'll tell you one other thing we'll have to take to Omaha is some old Forester 1920.
Yep. And some gumball head.
Well, so we'll take a lot of gumball head. So, Mike, as we get here to the end, do you have shout out?
I do have some shout outs.
All right. Shout them out.
I want to shout out the most recent PayPal contributors to Plastic Model Mojo. We've got Jeff Hens, Tim Cavalier, and Mike Aluzzi popped in there. And I don't know if that's from Mike or from the guys up in Peoria Collective, but we appreciate all that. Some nice contributions from those folks. And also in the PayPal list is Ed Baroth, who we talked to out at Las Vegas about the Yellow Wings, and
yes,
and had a short segment with him. And Ed, I haven't forgot about you. He wants to possibly do a segment on the system engineer's approach to planning model projects. And I haven't given that a whole lot of thought yet, but I want to. And I think sometime in the future, we're going to get Ed back on here to kind of talk that out, because I think would be an interesting concept to hash out. If you want to donate through PayPal, you can do so by going to www.plasticmodelmojo.com and take the heart icon link in the upper right-hand corner. That'll take you to a direct PayPal link where you can contribute to our show, and it's most appreciated. We've also got some Patreon subscribers now. Mike Shelley, David Waples, and Alex Restrepo from our own club there. Thanks, Alex. We appreciate those recurring contributions. Most appreciated. All this has really helped us out a lot and really made this a lot easier burden to carry, and we can just bring you more content and just keep Plastic Model Mojo rolling. So thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
Yes, I want to echo that. Thank you very much, because, it's really nice not to have to go deep in the hole to do what we're doing. Y'all really have offset the costs of a lot of what we're doing here, and we're most grateful for it. My shout out is a fellow podcaster. My shout out is John Bonani at Plastic Posse podcast because John stepped up. A lot of people talk a big game. A lot of people complain. John stepped up. He ran for what I think is the most difficult office in IPMS USA, which is second vice president. And second vice president is the party in charge of liaisoning between the national organization and the local chapter that is hosting a national. And John stepped up, ran for the office. God knows why, but I'm glad that he did, and he got elected. And so I'll be serving with John on the IPMSE board for the next 2 years, and I wish him luck because that's a tough job. So I salute him stepping up and doing it.
Hopefully, he didn't step in.
Well, yeah, that's true. It's a possibility.
All right. Well, thanks, John, and we look forward to seeing you next time, wherever it is.
Yep, absolutely.
All right, Dave, let's wrap this up because we got a long one thanks to Dr. Strangebrush. As they always say, Dave, so many kits.
So little time, Mike. I'll see you down the road.
All right, man. Take it easy. We'll catch up soon.
You got it. Take care.
All right.